On a scorching summer afternoon in rural Kentucky, retired businessman Richard Coleman sat in his silver Mercedes, stranded on the side of a quiet road. The 72-year-old, accustomed to the comforts of his wealth and privilege, had never imagined finding himself in such a predicament. A flat tire had brought his journey to a halt, and repeated attempts to call for roadside assistance were futile due to poor signal reception. Frustration bubbled within him as he leaned back in his seat, tapping his fingers impatiently on the steering wheel. The hum of the air conditioner barely kept the oppressive heat at bay. As Richard considered his limited options, he noticed a figure walking down the road toward him. A boy, no older than 14, approached confidently despite his modest appearance. A faded t-shirt, worn-out sneakers, and a determined expression. The boy stopped a few feet from the car, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the situation. "Got a flat, sir?" he asked, his voice steady but polite. Richard nodded, surprised by the boy's calm demeanor. "Yes, I do," he replied. "I've been trying to call for help, but no luck with my phone." The boy offered a small smile. "I can take care of it. My grandpa taught me how to change a tire last summer. Do you have a spare?" Relieved yet skeptical, Richard gestured toward the trunk. The boy quickly retrieved the tools and got to work without hesitation. His hands moved with practiced confidence as if he'd done this 100 times before. Richard stood by, watching in awe and feeling an unfamiliar sense of humility creeping in. Within minutes, the boy had the spare tire in place. Wiping his hands on his jeans, he stepped back and said, "All done." Impressed, Richard reached into his wallet, pulling out a few bills. "Here, take this. I appreciate your help." The boy politely raised his hand, declining the offer. "No need, sir. Just happy to help." As the boy walked away, Richard stood there, deeply moved by the selflessness of a stranger who had asked for nothing in return. That evening, as Richard Coleman sat alone in his grand yet empty home, the memory of the boy lingered in his mind. The selfless act of a young stranger helping him without hesitation or expectation was unlike anything he had encountered in a long time. Over the years, Richard's life had become a series of calculated transactions, where every interaction came with a price or a favor to be repaid. Yet here was a boy who appeared to have little in terms of material wealth, offering his help without any thought of reward. As Richard sipped his scotch in the quiet solitude of his study, he couldn't help but reflect on his life. His achievements in business had brought him wealth and comfort, but somewhere along the way he realized they had also distanced him from the simpler values he once cherished: kindness, humility, and genuine human connection. The boy's confident smile and gracious refusal of money were involved in the escape of kindness, humility, and genuine human connection. It wasn't just the act of changing the tire that struck him. It was the dignity with which the boy carried himself, as if he understood something Richard had long forgotten. The encounter left Richard with an unsettling yet transformative feeling. He began questioning his priorities, recognizing that the pursuit of status and wealth had left him disconnected from the deeper joys of life. The boy had given him more than just roadside assistance. He had offered a glimpse of a world where kindness still existed in its purest form. That night, as Richard sat surrounded by the trappings of his success, he felt a rare sense of humility and gratitude. The boy's actions reminded him of a truth he hadn't considered in years. Sometimes, the greatest riches are found in giving, not receiving. The next morning, Richard Coleman felt an inexplicable urge to find the boy who had helped him. He couldn't shake the feeling that their brief encounter held a deeper significance. Determined to learn more about the young stranger, he set out in his car, retracing the same road where their paths had crossed. Along the way, Richard stopped at diners, gas stations, and small shops, describing the boy to anyone who would listen. Most people shrugged or shook their heads, but he refused to give up. Finally, at a small cafe on the outskirts of a neighboring town, an older woman behind the counter paused when she heard Richard's description. "You're probably talking about Eli," she said with a warm smile. "That boy's always helping folks around here. Lives with his mama over in Harlan." "Harlan?" Richard repeated, making a mental note. "Thank you." With new resolve, Richard drove the hour-long journey to Harlan, a quiet, modest town nestled in the foothills of the Appalachians. As he arrived, the charm of the small town barely registered. His mind was preoccupied with questions about the boy's life and family. Asking around, he received similar responses: praise for Eli's helpfulness and respect for his hard-working mother. Eventually, a kind local directed Richard to a small house on the edge of town. The house was simple, with peeling paint and a sagging front porch, but it was tidy and well kept. Richard parked his car and hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to introduce himself. Taking a deep breath, he approached the door and knocked, ready to meet the boy whose act of kindness had unexpectedly changed his perspective. When Richard Coleman knocked on the door of the modest house, it opened to reveal a woman in her early 40s, with kind eyes and a weary but welcoming demeanor. Her clothes were simple, and her hands bore the signs of someone accustomed to hard work. She looked at him curiously, her face softening when Richard introduced himself and mentioned how her son Eli had helped him the day before. "It sounds like my Eli," she said with a small, proud smile, stepping aside to invite Richard in. "He's always helping someone." As Richard entered, he was struck by the warmth of the home. Though the furniture was old and the walls bore marks of wear, everything was clean and organized. Family photos adorned the walls, and a few hand-drawn pictures, clearly from a younger Eli, were tacked onto the refrigerator. The home lacked the opulence Richard was used to, but it exuded a sense of love and care that his own house seemed to lack. The woman, who introduced herself as Claire, offered Richard a seat and began sharing bits of their life. She spoke of how she worked long hours at a local diner to provide for her family, and how Eli often took on extra responsibilities to help. "He's got a heart bigger than this house," Claire said with a mix of pride and humility. "Always looking for ways to make things better, even if it's just fixing a neighbor's fence or helping someone change a tire." Richard listened intently, marveling at the strength and resilience of this family. Despite their limited means, they seemed rich in the values that truly mattered: kindness, integrity, and a deep bond with one another. He couldn't help but compare their life to his own, where wealth had come at the cost of connection and simplicity. When Eli returned from the backyard, where he had been working on a fence, his face lit up with surprise upon seeing Richard. "Hey, mister," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "What are you doing here?" Richard smiled, feeling strangely nervous under the boy's curious gaze. "I wanted to thank you again, Eli. You helped me when I really needed it, and I wanted to meet the family that raised such an incredible young man." Eli shrugged off the praise with the same easy humility he'd shown the day before. As Richard stayed to talk with them, he felt something stir inside him, a sense of admiration and gratitude for the lessons this boy and his family were teaching him without even trying. Deeply moved by Eli's kindness and the resilience of his family, Richard Coleman felt compelled to do something meaningful for them. Returning to his grand estate that evening, he reflected on how Eli's selflessness and the warmth of their modest home had stirred something inside him, a longing to give back in a way that truly mattered. He made a decision. He would ensure that the family who had given him so much inspiration would have the stability and comfort they deserved. The very next morning, Richard began making calls. He reached out to contractors, suppliers, and old colleagues, leveraging his network to organize a complete renovation of Eli's home. This wasn't about charity, Richard told himself. It was about honoring their strength and selflessness. By midday, plans were in place, and within a week, trucks and workers began arriving at the small house on the edge of town. When the first crew pulled up, Eli and his mother Claire stood on the porch, their faces filled with shock and disbelief. Claire approached Richard, her voice trembling. "Mr. Coleman, you didn't have to do this. We've managed fine on our own." Richard smiled, his tone earnest. "Claire, you've done more than manage. You've thrived. But you and Eli gave me something I didn't know I was missing. Let me return the favor." Over the next several weeks, the transformation began. The sagging porch was replaced with sturdy wood, providing a safe and welcoming entryway. The leaking roof was repaired, ensuring the family would stay dry during storms. Inside, walls were painted a warm, cheerful color, floors were polished, and the outdated kitchen was outfitted with modern appliances. Outside, the backyard saw a major upgrade. The rusty old swing set was replaced with a brand new one, and the fence Eli had been patching together was rebuilt to stand strong for years to come. At first, Eli tried to help the workers, carrying planks and sweeping debris, but Richard insisted he take a break. "Your job," Richard said with a grin, "is to enjoy being a kid for a little while." Despite this, Eli's curiosity got the better of him. He spent hours watching the crew at work, his eyes lighting up as he asked questions about tools and construction techniques. One of the workers, a burly man named Joe, took Eli under his wing, teaching him how to measure and cut wood. Eli's enthusiasm was infectious, and Richard couldn't help but feel a sense of pride watching the boy's eagerness to learn. For Richard, the project became more than just a renovation. It was a mission to honor the values Eli and his family embodied. Seeing the house transform into a comfortable, stable environment filled Richard with a kind of joy he hadn't experienced in years. By the end of the renovation, the house was unrecognizable, a symbol of resilience and gratitude. As Richard watched Eli and Claire marvel at their transformed home, he realized that this act of giving had changed him as much as it had changed their lives. As the renovation of their home progressed, Eli couldn't help but be drawn to the work happening around him. Though Richard Coleman had urged him to take a break and enjoy being a kid, Eli's natural curiosity and eagerness to learn quickly surfaced. Each day after school, he would wander out to the yard, watching the crew measure, cut, and assemble with precision. His wide eyes followed every motion, soaking in the process as though he were discovering something magical. One of the workers, Joe, a tall, burly man with years of construction experience, noticed Eli's interest. "You want to give it a try?" he asked one afternoon, handing Eli a tape measure. At first hesitant, Eli's confidence grew as Joe guided him through measuring planks and marking them for cutting. Before long, Eli was helping with simple tasks, and the workers found his enthusiasm contagious. As the days went on, Eli's questions grew more complex. He wanted to understand why certain tools were used, how measurements were calculated, and what materials were best for different tasks. The crew, impressed by his curiosity and quick learning, began teaching him more. They showed him how to use a level, the importance of structural integrity, and even the basics of planning a project. Eli absorbed it all, his excitement and determination shining through. One evening, as the crew packed up their tools, Richard noticed Eli sitting beside Joe, studying a set of blueprints. Smiling, he approached and listened quietly as Eli talked about his dreams. "One day, I want to do this kind of work," Eli said earnestly. "Not just building houses, but helping people, like you've helped us." Richard felt a swell of pride and admiration. He realized that this young boy, with his innate kindness and growing passion for learning, had the potential to make a significant impact on the world. "You'll be great at it, Eli," Richard said, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You've already got what it takes to make a difference." For Eli, the renovation of his home wasn't just a transformation of his surroundings, it was a spark that ignited a vision for his future. And for Richard, seeing Eli's dreams take shape was a reminder of how much power one act of kindness could hold in shaping a life. After the renovation was complete, Richard Coleman found himself returning to Eli's home regularly. What had started as an act of gratitude became something much deeper, a sense of purpose and belonging that Richard hadn't felt in years. The once stranger was now a part of their lives, welcomed warmly into their modest yet lively home. Eli's kindness had done more than just transform his own family's life. It had reignited something in Richard. The boy's selflessness and optimism reminded him of the values he had lost amid years of chasing wealth and status. Through their connection, Richard rediscovered the simple joy of human connection, the fulfillment that came from giving without expectation. For Richard, the visits weren't just about helping the family. They were about being part of something genuine. Eli and his family had given him the greatest gift, a renewed faith in generosity and the beauty of shared humanity. The story of Richard Coleman and Eli serves as a profound reminder that true wealth is not measured by possessions or status, but by the impact we have on others through acts of kindness and selflessness. Richard, a man who had spent a lifetime building financial success, discovered that the joy and fulfillment he sought couldn't be bought. It came from connecting with others and giving without expectation. Eli's simple yet powerful act of helping a stranger sparked a transformation in Richard's life. It reminded him of the values he had long forgotten: humility, generosity, and the importance of human connection. By reaching out to help Eli and his family, Richard found more than a renewed sense of purpose. He found a community, a sense of belonging, and a deeper understanding of what truly matters. For Eli, the experience reinforced his natural kindness and ignited a passion for helping others. His actions showed that even the smallest gestures can create ripples of change, inspiring those around him. As Richard drove away from their newly transformed home for the final time, he realized the greatest lesson of all. Life is not about what you accumulate, but about what you give and the lives you touch along the way. In giving, he had gained far more than he ever expected: connection, meaning, and true wealth. If you love this meaningful and deeply inspiring story, please leave a comment and don't forget to subscribe to watch the next interesting videos.